Now we're going to talk about this idea of stability and change. Stability and change is analyzing how susceptible we are to change over time. There's many different things that we can look at, but one of the most common areas that gets explored is personality. Who we are as a person, our personality traits, are these things that are defined at birth? Do they tend to be stable throughout our lives, or are they subject to change? Exactly how do we study personality? There are several different approaches. One of the most common and widely accepted is what we call trait theory. Trait theory takes a look at the idea that there are some fundamental traits of which we express some level of, and they're usually along a continuum. So you might have something like the emotional versus stable trait and the introverted versus extroverted trait. And along these dimensions, we might be somebody who tends to be highly emotional, or somebody that tends to be highly emotionally stable, somebody who's more introverted, somebody who might be more extroverted. And we can follow along these different dimensions to see how people might describe us. Right? Somebody who is extremely introverted, but very emotionally stable might be considered calm. While somebody who is extremely introverted but a little more emotional might be considered moody or anxious. Somebody who's very extroverted and stable might be considered easygoing, sociable. Somebody who's a little more emotional might be seen as excitable or restless or touchy. Right? So we can define these traits along a continuum and then try to categorize people into specific traits. The Big Five is one of the dominant trait theories out there, sometimes called the Ocean trait theory because it stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. These are dimensions at which we can follow along from either expressing these traits openly to having very little of these traits. Right? Openness is somebody who is compelled by ideas, who likes to understand things, who is constantly pursuing new ideas and education, versus people who are not that interested in abstractions, who struggle to have what's sometimes called a good imagination. Right? Conscientiousness are people who are prepared, detail-oriented, like to get chores done right away. They're very ordered people, as opposed to people who might struggle to be organized, who don't do as well in tight, controlled environments, are not as detailed-oriented, may not be as clean or tidy individuals. Extroversion is how emotionally and socially expressive you are. Are you the life of the party? Do you like to be the center of attention? Are you comfortable around people? Or do you prefer to be by yourself, to not draw attention? You prefer quiet to parties, right? You require a lot of sort of recharge time when forced to interact socially. Agreeableness is how well you get along with other people, how agreeable you are. Do you show empathy? Are you interested in people? Can you sympathize? Or are you not really all that interested in people? Are you sort of maybe even prone to being mean? Do you not have a lot of concern for other people? And neuroticism, lastly, is your emotional stability. How easily do you get irritated? How easily do you get stressed out or upset? Or are you more stable, right? Your emotions tend to be more controlled and less expressive. You then can take each of these traits, determine where people fall along them in a continuum, and kind of define them or categorize them into certain personality traits. Right? So people have tried to do that and define them in various ways. And then what we're looking at here is we're looking at heritability of these traits. So monozygotic, or MZ, are twins that are identical. Dizygotic are twins that are fraternal. Right? The bigger this number is compared to this number, the more heritability tends to play a role. So if we look at openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, which we just talked about, you'll see that there's actually substantially high heritability index here, which are suggested that these are traits that likely emerge at birth. These are sort of the dark triad traits of narcissism, which means self-focus, Machiavellianism, which is sort of a pragmatism almost at the expense of other people, and psychopathy is sort of immoral reasoning. And you can see that the heritability of these traits is a lot less compared to sort of the big five. But our goal is to ask, to what degree can these traits change over time? It turns out that they're relatively stable, but that depends on your age. What you find is that traits identified in children are subject to a lot of change over the course of 7 years. As we approach college and university students, they tend to become more stable, more set in our ways. By the time we're approaching our 50s, whatever expressions we have of these traits tend to be pretty much baked in. But none of these reach 100%, which means to some degree these traits are subject to change throughout our whole entire lives.